Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box. Well, if you think that the censorship of music began in the 1980s with Tipper Gore and her PMRC, and specifically if you think that in its later years the censorship of hip-hop was all down to people like Tipper Gore and Charlton Heston, who went after Ice-T, and people like that, the Two Live Crew censorship, there were generations of musicians in a genre that long predated hip hop that faced some of the very same challenges. And that's why today I want to talk with you about Calypso. Now, calypso music had its origins in the 19th century and began in its instrumental form. That is obviously recognized in modern calypsos as the backing to vocal music. But it was in around the early 20th century that calypso took on the form of modern storytelling lyrics set to this calypso beat. And hence we have a genre reaching, in a musical sense, its maturity. Now, in the first 4 decades of the 20th century, the music became an increasingly important part of the culture of Trinidad and Tobago. This was, of course, Caribbean culture, and in particular, the lyrics were used to criticize the political corruption of Trinidad, the rule of the British Empire in Trinidad, and a lot of the social problems that stemmed from issues of governance and general matters of sociological observation. Now, far from sort of being a folk style critique, the music was very explicit. It could be raunchy at times, and it could be highly scathing about the power structure. Now, if this reminds any of you of conscious hip hop, it really should, because in many ways, no two genres are more linked by their scathing criticism of the powers that be. But much like hip hop expressed it with wordplay, with poetry, with rhyming meter, Calypso lyricists also express their dissatisfaction with the power structure using double entendre, using coded language. And a lot of this was developed out of necessity because the Trinidadian authorities in the 1920s and 30s and into the 40s, not only did they censor calypso musicians really rapidly. But many great calypso recordings of the era were actually destroyed as a result. The censorship campaign against calypso in early, first half of the 20th century Trinidad was so extreme it almost makes Tipper Gore and her bloodhounds, pardon me, sound like puppy dogs. But the story didn't end for Calypso there under the dark cloud of censorship, because by the late 40s and into the 50s, the music's popularity began to spread to cultures outside of Trinidad, including other parts of the Caribbean, such as Jamaica, and to the large US audience, where you even saw the Andrew Sisters, a very non-Trinidadian group, do calypso music, particularly the song Rum and Coca-Cola. But calypso truly became an internationally known and beloved genre in the 50s when this artist pictured behind me, quite possibly the greatest calypso artist of all time, Harry Belafonte, came out with his debut album. Belafonte had a voice that was like no other, instantly recognizable, such a smooth and wonderful but powerful sound, great dynamic range, phrasing that was impeccable, and his debut album, I should say, called Calypso, truly put the genre on the map. So much so that Frank Zappa recalls a meeting he had with a record executive in the late 50s, early 60s. And he said to a young Frank, "Oh, this rock and roll thing is just a fad. The next big thing is Calypso." And that might seem funny today, but there was a time that Calypso records were outselling almost every other genre in the United States. And this is, of course, a music that was very particular to one part of the Caribbean, Trinidad. But Thanks to Belafonte and others, it achieved wide success. Now, obviously, rock and roll became the de rigueur music for the young generation, but Calypso was always something that sold. Belafonte sold millions upon millions of records into the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond. And in that spirit of Calypso, he became a major civil rights activist in the United States, which is only fitting because Calypso music was anti establishment music. It was music about justice, about equality, about the things that we would now call civil rights. And other artists became big calypso sellers as well. There were calypso music festivals, jazz clubs started featuring calypso acts. And so it was a music that became intertwined into the international musical consciousness without ever truly losing its sound. Although today, few probably outside of Trinidad and other places in the Caribbean probably remember its radical roots. And that's why I say without Calypso, hip hop as we know it might not exist. Hip hop, in many ways, you could say, was the American response to Trinidadian calypso, insofar as its social role and insofar as its social goals. Of course, many genres influence many other genres, but I really think there is a clear link there. If you don't believe me, just delve into many of the great calypso records of the 20th century. Might as well start with Harry Belafonte, a great musical genius. Like, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Take care.